floor is yours.
Superb. And first of all, could I thank MadeFor for facilitating today's event. I've been super impressed by the mission of MadeFor, which is really to equip the next generation of CX leaders. And I can see the importance of investing in yourself as CX leaders. This is a really fertile kind of industry that new knowledge is really going to help you move forward. This is a full participation event, so I'm going to get you to first of all tell me where in the world you're joining from today, just so that you get to start typing, because I want you to let me know some questions as we go through. We're going to try and make this a two-way discussion. This session is all about you, so I'm going to outline some objectives at the start of the conversation. But certainly, I really want to get your input throughout. So there's David from Belfast, Agnes obviously from Amsterdam. There we go. There's a fair bit from the Belfast crew. I'm seeing familiar faces as well, Eamon and others. Emmett from Oma, dialing in from Belfast. There's a few from London. And Anna gets the prize from Greece. So thank you so much for that. So today I'm going to share you some thoughts, really, and really, if you're in the business of customer experience, you're certainly in the business of measurement, and you will probably heard of the measurement Net Promoter Score. And the challenge that if you're using data collection, particularly surveys, is that surveys are retrospective. They're asking about a historical experience, and I think the opportunity for you is to think about how can you leverage technology to create the next predictor of satisfaction. So, what are the things going into the future experience that will really help shape the experience that you're going to create for your customers? So, to do that, we've got three goals. So, if you've started your customer and employee centricity journey, today's session will give you a kickstart and kickstart the new thinking around incorporating new approaches to customer experience. If you haven't, don't worry. Today's session is all about giving you a turbo boost to empower you to make a difference. So I'm going to try and give you as many actionable insights that you could use in the next 24, 1 week, 1 month. And then if you stay to the end, you're all going to get a present. So hopefully that creates enough intrigue for you to hang about and stay. There's Rita from Indianapolis in the US. You're very welcome, Rita. So I know everyone's zoomed out, and by this point, we're all Teams or Zoom fatigued. So what I thought is I'm going to go off camera, just provide a quick 1-minute video that gives you a bit of an overview into Adoreboard, and then I'll kick off today's session. So there you go. That's just to give you a quick overview of Adoreboard, just by way of quick overview. You'll hear me talk about this idea of human experience. We're seeing the most advanced companies in the world combine both customer and employee experience, but I'll come on to that. So here's the challenge, right? You are trying to understand the drivers of your Net Promoter Score. The challenge is that NPS does an amazing job of one thing, which gives you a score. The challenge is that you have a whole pile of comments that you need to analyze to get to the why. So we talk about this idea of crossing the NPS chasm, which is essentially moving from a number, which is telling you what has happened, to allowing you to understand why. So what are the drivers? So when you go present your customer experience insights to your executive board, they'll move from so what to, tell me what next to do. So that's kind of framing the challenge. If you're going to use Net Promoter Score as a key focus, you're going to have this gap that emerges, that if you just use the score, it'll tell you what, and it's kind of so what. If you bring those two things together, you can get significant value. And I suppose surveys and NPS was set up before technology has kind of advanced, and I'll show you that in a second. But essentially, a lot of surveys focus on the closed questions, because if NPS could tell you the what and the why, then you wouldn't need text analytics, you wouldn't need any of these kind of fancy technologies. But if we were to kind of look at how this is evolved, and the opportunity for you is that in the next number of years, the text data, and particularly unstructured sources, of which all the data suggests that 80% of the data coming around the organization is going to be unstructured. The challenge for you is that the ones that have figured out how to use and leverage that information, they're able to use that as a competitive advantage. So I think, the data that you're going to collect from all the touch points from the customer experience, the opportunity for you is to kind of leverage in a way that gives you new insights that your competitors don't have, which will give you a unique position. So how do you do that? To do that, we kind of have to go back in time to kind of look at the evolution of how text analytics has evolved, and how that might evolve in the next 10 years. So if you're to look at, the axis, one is speed to insight, which is you get data in, your ability is you need to generate insights ASAP. And you can see on the bottom axis, time. So the first kind of text analytics was back in the 1950s. It was keyword retrieval. From IBM, some of their data scientists that were able to just get basic information retrieval. That then evolved what we call second generation, which is, this idea of trying to get some opinions from the data, and sentiment analysis as well. And you'll be probably aware of sentiment analysis, positive, negative, and neutral. That kind of second generation is kind of where we're at today. And if you're to use NPS or even sentiment, NPS is quite a blunt measurement metrics, as we've just discussed. And our view is that sentiment's redundant. So if you're using sentiment, it's going to tell you what has happened, not why. So if you're to kind of peer into the future, your executives are probably more interested in the stories that you're able to tell from the data. So technology is going to evolve to be able to extract narratives essentially from the text, and that will auto-generate and basically pop up the answers. So all you have to do is rock up and share the insights. So that's kind of the promise of where we're going with natural language generation and things like that there. But I think all of this here is trying to understand the knowledge from the data so that you don't have to manually go through that. So I suppose that's the opportunity. If you're to then kind of frame this as status quo, which is don't do anything, or how you can move this forward, I'll just kind of show you those two areas to kind of contrast. So if you're to think about viewing your customers as purely as a score, you're treating your customer as a number. So you're almost getting a black and white view of your customer. You know, you're getting the outline, not really getting the full picture. And what I suggest is that where you need to go is to almost get an ultra high definition view of your customer to really bring the customer into your decision-making process. And we'll talk about this in a second, but essentially we think that our view as sentiment is redundant, and really thinking about how emotion actually evolves is based on this idea of emotional intensity that will give you better prioritization. And certainly, as we talked about the data storytelling, you know, typically you're probably relying on word clouds. And from a data visualization, they're a bit like pie charts, you know, and the data visualization experts would say, you know, pie charts best left for dessert. You know, they're quite pleasing, but actually don't tell you anything of substance. So you need to move from this idea of word clouds to understanding. And then finally, you know, move from thinking about your customers and employees as a number to understanding them as people. So how do you do that? Well, I'm going to introduce a number of concepts. And I suppose before I do that, just to give you a bit of context to build on the overview of who we are. So I want to certainly introduce this idea of better human experience. So typically as CX professionals, we think about, you know, brand to channel, and that's how we interact with our customers. But ultimately, if you're to think about it in a different way and think about all the different touch points, you know, you're going to incorporate different channels, but you're certainly going to include employees and understand the drivers of employee emotion as well. So that's just to introduce this idea of both customer and employee emotions being kind of central to that idea of better human experience. So hopefully that is of value. So when we're thinking about the text analytics, you know, when you get the data from your customers, it's usually in an Excel. And the challenge for you is threefold. Number one is you're going to have to manually go through that verbatim, which will be time intensive, inaccurate, and will lack the depth of insight you need. Number two is that your executives will certainly need you to provide actionable insight to tell them, you know, why and then what next. And then finally, we're seeing the more sophisticated organizations link the experience data to the operational metrics. So you should be able to tell them, you know, what to do to improve the customer experience, and then how is that going to impact the operational metrics, be it sales or whatever that North Star is. And the startling fact from Forrester is that 3 out of 5 chief customer officers are going to get fired. It's typically the tenure is 18 months because they can't connect the customer experience to bottom line, which is essentially the big struggle around how you validate the business case for change within customer experience. So I'm going to show you how you do that and kind of 3 ways that you can transform the Net Promoter Score into the next predictor of satisfaction. And throughout this, please ask questions. So what Adoreboard does is we can take 1,000 comments, and within a really short period of time, we are extracting thematics and then linking that to an emotional intensity. And then our AI is essentially writing your 12 slide deck. So we're giving you an overview of the performance. And then we're predicting if you go fix certain issues, what impact that would have on the NPS. So you get this idea of prescriptive insights. So the value of that is kind of twofold. A, if you can bring your customer into the decision-making process based on their emotions, kind of ticks the box that you've brought the customer in to that decision-making process. And then what you can see here for Starbucks is that the third insight is Starbucks mobile app. So if you've ever tried, you know, ordering ahead and that being a really frustrating experience, you can see that, you know, people trying to order their coffee while, you know, on their way to work or whatever, to just jump into Starbucks to pick it up. It's driving 4% of the conversation, 14% more sadness compared to the overall data set. And if Starbucks go improve the mobile app, that would drive their NPS by 1%. So the biggest conversation that I've heard is this idea of monetization of NPS. So how would a 1% increase in your NPS extend the lifetime value of a Starbucks customer? And if you think a Starbucks customer is spending probably around $400 a year or more on Starbucks, if you're able to improve that experience and drive that experience by, in this example, 13%, that certainly gives a big jump in revenue in that lifetime value. So it's kind of getting you to think about this idea of monetization. And it's interesting. We work with DHL. Their CX department is based in their sales operation. We worked with Michelin, and their CX operation is more attached to operations. So a lot of the CX, where we're seeing the departments emerge, is trying to connect it to business impact. So that's hopefully this is all, you're all in agreement, and this all makes sense. So we're going to focus on emotion, because I think that where you need to go from is thinking about your customer as a number. So and there's some challenges about that. So if you think about the number and what's in numbers, then you'll miss the actual drivers. So we need to think about how you move from thinking about your customers as a number to thinking about them as people. The reason why you want to do that is that 80% of your customers' decisions are driven by how they feel. So if you kind of work that out, you can then get to optimize the outcome from their experience. So hopefully, again, that makes sense. So how do you do that? Well, there's a teachable moment here from psychology that tells us how emotion is formed. So I'll just go through that. So I'm going to introduce you to a bit of theory on emotion. And there's three key takeaways that I'm going to introduce. But for context, this is what's known as the wheel of emotion. It was created by a professor called Professor Plutchik, and this becomes Plutchik's Wheel of Emotion. It's based on 4 decades of empirical research on emotion. So it's the mainstream kind of current knowledge on how emotions are formed. And there's 3 key takeaways that I think are really relevant for customer experience. Number 1 is that emotions are not static. So if you're to place your customers in a bucket of positive, negative, or neutral, you're getting it wrong straight out of the box, right? And I'll give you a quick example. I use my mobile phone to, take pictures. The kids love the camera. The battery and the charger drives me nuts. So I can have different emotions about the same brand experience. And your job as CX professionals is to optimize the things that are driving joy, and to remove the things that are driving anger. The second takeaway is that emotions are opposite. So this gives you a really amazing compass to understand if your customers are feeling, sad about, not getting access to the mobile app. You can actually drive them to a new emotional experience. So you have the opportunity to flip from sadness to joy, and you can think about the experiences that you can then create to get them to arrive at that goal. The beauty about this model is you can actually measure that change in emotional intensity to then see where you're at. And then more importantly, when you're speaking to your chief financial officer to get sign off on your CX business case, you need to tell them that emotion drives consumer action. So emotion goes from low intensity to medium to high. And the key takeaway here is that the higher the intensity, the more likely your customers are going to take an action. So you can see here that, annoyance goes to anger to then rage. That can be positive, so acceptance to trust to admiration. Your job here is to arrest the experience at the emotion or annoyance stage. So you have an opportunity to arrest the experience, but also to direct the post-experience, follow-up as well. So if you understand where your customers are, you have an opportunity to recover that. And that's really important from a lifetime value perspective, from a churn perspective, and on all of that good stuff. So that's just a bit of a context to that. So I'm going to now pivot you to strategy. So how can you then take this as a framework and start to apply it? And this framework is open source, and you know, it's available. It's just our current process. And Colin is the first one to get a brownie point for asking the question. So Colin, thank you so much. I'm going to pause and hopefully everyone can read Colin's question, which is excellent. I'm going to get a couple of questions and then pause and then, you know, get 3 more. So Colin, you get the brownie points. Colin McMaster is my hero. He's asked the first question. I need 2 other people to ask 2 more questions and then we'll pause. So I'm going to introduce you to a really simple framework. This is called decision ready insights. So you'll hear the term actionable insights bandied about. You know, it needs to be actionable. You know, where's the actionable insights, right? But as a CX professional, you could provide all the recommendations that you want, but guaranteed you're going to get recommendation fatigue, because what's missing here is business context. So my challenge to you is, how do you create insights that are decision ready, that allows your executive level to kind of inhale those insights to then match the context, right? So if I'm a Starbucks executive, you've just presented, geez, you're really excited about the mobile app, and you've just said, hey, it's going to drive a 1% in NPS. And I'm the chief operating officer, and I know that an update in the app is coming next week. I've just totally deprioritized that issue because I'm aware of the issue and we've got a fixed release. So I think it's really important that you think about your insights that you create in the business context. So the 3 steps are: integrate the data from touch point back rather from channel to customer, understand what drives the emotion, and then apply decision ready insight to drive a business impact. Part of the challenge here is to test before you invest. We're going to introduce this idea of predictive analytics to help you get a prescriptive insight before you go, you know, showing the insights to your colleagues. So Robin, well done. So Robin also gets a brownie point. That's question number 2, and I'll come to that in a second. So how do you integrate the data? So, you know, around the experience, you're going to have multiple data sources, you know, Medallia, Qualtrics, InMoment, Zendesk, you know, Twitter, wherever your customer exists. Like, you need to get an integrated view, a 360 view of your customer, so that you get a consistent view. And even in terms of thinking about omni-channel kind of improvements, that's really beneficial to do that. So it so happens that we're a Qualtrics partner. 65% of our customers are Qualtrics. So we're kind of very much embedded in the Qualtrics and Medallia view of CX. And what we talk about is speed to insight. So regardless of you know, what you need to achieve in your job, you need to present these insights super quick. So I'll maybe just pause there for a second, because Ronan's given me the magical 3rd question. So Colin has asked, thinking about language, does the science have refactored for each language to account for structured and idioms, particularly for excited or upset people? Robin's building very kindly and Colin's question by saying, does the science take into cultural differences and how people from different continents might express their emotions? And then Ronan is talking about this idea of the next generation of text analytics. What text advancements are going to allow this to better understand context? So these are very much in the area of the technology. So if that's useful, I'll maybe spend a second just answering that. So the challenge in all of this is not just quantifying human emotion. It's actually, you know, dealing with text analytics challenges, you know, how people speak in everyday language. And there's, not to bore you with the science, but there's this, you know, field of computer science around common sense reasoning, which what you're trying to do is you're trying to mimic how people understand concepts in everyday life. So as humans, we understand that birthday is festivity and special occasion. So that's a semantic meaning. And we can then connect that to, in our heads, joy and surprise. So that's how the advances in text analytics, trying to understand how we speak in everyday language and then trying to root that those concepts in an emotional intensity. That can be challenging because different things mean have a different context. And I'll give you an example. We worked with Primark for a number of years, and Primark customers talk about the concept of dupes. If you've ever shopped in Primark or Primark, you'll get this idea of, I just got a Joe Malone dupes, or just got a Gucci dupes. And in the context of dupes, our system would detect that as counterfeit, duplicate, counterfeit, all the rest. But actually, Primark customers are really happy that they've got a duplicate of Joe Malone that costs them £2 instead of £50. So they're really happy about that. So you can have different techniques in text analytics that can suppress the meaning or tune that knowledge graph and kind of evolve the knowledge as it goes, and you have advances in terms of machine learning and things like that. And then just to finish with Ronan's question, this idea of the advancement. So if you think about the first phase was almost this keyword approach. The challenge with keywords is it's very brittle, so if the keyword doesn't exist, then the text analytics will not find that. And then the advancement in the technology was this idea of bag of words, right? So you get multiple words associated with Apple or whatever it happens to be. The challenge with all of those is they are very kind of intense from a compute perspective, but you almost have to train the system to detect those. And I think at a broader context, the difference between categorization, where you're almost categorizing the knowledge that exists, versus exploratory analysis. And the analysis we're going to look at today is in that exploratory approach, where, if you don't teach the system what you're looking for, the chances are you'll find things you don't know. So that's how the text analytics is evolving. It's going from specific keywords to bag of keywords to concepts to narratives. So it's trying to work out what's the overall story in the analysis. So hopefully, please let me know if that was useful, and we'll get a bit more into the detail in a second here. So I'm going to move fairly quickly here. So step number 1 is integrate the data. Step number 2 is to understand the intensity of the emotion. So we give you an overall score. We correlate that to the NPS, so we can understand, does trust correlate to an increase in NPS, so you can then understand the drivers. We then are able to then, go deeper to understand, what emotional index is driving trust to a specific emotion, to a theme. So the example here is for Apple, and you're probably wondering, well, why is Apple minus 72? So we can look at the great things that Apple are doing. You can see that people love going into the Genius Bar and getting a great customer experience. If you've ever gone into their Genius Bars, you're treated with white gloves. Doesn't really explain the anger. So weirdly, people hate getting emoji keyboard updates when they just want the battery and the charger fixed. So Apple, go fix the battery and the charger. So the analysis and the methodology I've shown you is giving you a automatic root cause analysis. So that's great, and that gets you to the analysis point. Where you need to get to is to the insight. So we give you an automatic scorecard that gives you an overall performance on an index -100 to +100. We give that breakdown into Adored, which is for positive indexes, Ignored, which is measuring non-emotional language, and then Floored, which is from anger to fear. We're using correlations then to understand what is the link between the emotion and the operational metric. So this will give you an evidential basis to understand if trust goes up, NPS increases. So, hey, let's go look at all the themes that are driving trust to then focus on those. We will then get prescriptive insights to then say, okay, if we fix all these issues, we're going to get a 13% increase in our NPS, and that will equate to X% increase in the lifetime value of customers. We're then giving you up to 10 different predictions. So I'm just going to very quickly show you this, but I'm going to zoom into product temperature. So what you get here is the theme, the volume, the insight, and then the illustrative comment. So if we were to take the theme is product temperature. The context of the theme is the product temperature is driving 4% of the volume. The insight is that this particular driver is driving 15% more sadness compared to the overall data set. So basically, if Starbucks trained their staff to hand over the coffee quicker or change the thermostats in the coffee machine, that would drive the NPS by 1%. And then to tell that story, you can see that no one loves a cold hot chocolate. So that would allow you to very quickly give you the insight at rapid speed to understand what's happening. To give you a practical example, I'm going to refer back to the fashion retailer that we talked before. So Primark analysed 4 million reviews on an ongoing basis. When they analysed that through our system, they could see that anger and rage was emanating from the theme of changing rooms, and everyone was scratching their heads going, what the hell is happening in those changing rooms? And they could see the driver of those emotions was lighting and mirrors. And again, they're kind of scratching their heads going, what on earth has happened? And so suddenly when they read the verbatims in our dashboard, they could see that people were saying, your lighting and mirrors are like cellulite detection devices from outer space. So people were walking in, getting a fright and bolting out like scalded cats from the changing rooms and leaving a trail of unpurchased products in their midst. This was a major surprise to the board because they had invested millions of pounds upgrading the store experience. Obviously, the key insight here is we could predict if they turned down the lighting, changed the mirrors, they would reduce the churn, the number of people abandoning purchase in the changing rooms by 25%. I promised you I would link this to employee experience. So there is a link to employee experience. So as a result of the mirrors being horrible, people were taking what's known as hauls. So basically they're going in and grabbing as many clothes as possible and bringing them home. And because Primark employ temporary staff, Primark is the only high street fashion retailer that put the sizing on their hangers. And so the employees were just flinging the clothes back in any old hangers. So they're pissed off at the changing rooms, and then they're going home to find out they're trying on the wrong sizes of clothing. So it kind of shows you the link between the customer experience and employee experience, just to give you an example. So I'm going to keep it really practical. So these are 3 actions you can take today to get your NPS to be more prescriptive. So I'm going to encourage you to keep the NPS score and the question, but I'm going to show you how you can use predictive analytics to make your NPS more prescriptive. You can keep the NPS metric, but change the question. So that's a practical step where you can get more insight by reframing the question. And then I'm going to give you an example where you get rid of the question and the metric. And now I think that is where I'm seeing companies get significant value. So I'll just take you through those 3 examples. And again, Pedro has asked an amazing question. Henrik has asked another amazing question. So I need one more person, and then we'll pause for those questions. So number 1, keep the NPS metric and the NPS question. So this is an example for a hospital. So this hospital is based in Australia. It's the largest private hospital called Healthscope. They use Qualtrics, where they're analysing 8,000 responses in real time. So they're getting 8,000 responses from their patients in real time. They're then using the analysis and pushing it through Adoreboard to then understand the emotions. So you go to their hospital to get your heart rate measured. You also get your emotions, patient emotions measured in real time as well. So my recommendation is, how do you solve problems for cohorts of customers or employees? And this will get you think about your highest value customer. So you want to prioritize how you fix certain things for those customers. So they wanted to really improve the experience for people paying major money to have private hospital experience. So we were able to identify in real time, 46 patients. They got an alert. 46 patients are complaining about blood pressure, and that was driving trust by 33%. So trust was falling, sadness was increasing. They automatically thought it was the machinery, so they were looking for faults in the machine. And we predicted if they go fix the issue with the blood pressure cuffs, that would drive the NPS by 18%. The insight was actually, it was the training given to the nurses. So the training given to the nurses was to fit these blood pressure cuffs, but they did it in such a way that it essentially were fitted too tightly. So every time the blood pressure cuff went off, it was punching the patient in the arm. So these elderly patients that are quite susceptible to bruises were leaving the hospital, battered and bruised. So it was only when, they saw, and kind of the emotional analysis was bringing this to light, that suddenly the kind of the penny dropped. So, bruising in my arm when I got home, nearly in tears, trying to explain that to the nurses. Some people do find it uncomfortable, and basically the patient or the customer telling them the truth and the answer. So when these narratives started coming up in multiple ways, then, the executives start setting up and taking action. And I think, where this is their chief patient officer, Jeffrey, who's worked with Adoreboard for the last 3 years, where, if you're to simply say our NPS is down by 3%, how galvanized do you think your frontline workers would be to take an action? If you say that the blood pressure cuffs are driving sadness by 88%, you bet you that your frontline workers are going to sit up and say, well, what on earth is happening there? So the value of emotion AI is it can connect in more empathetic ways with your end users is the key takeaway. Going to shift from hospital to insurance, and just to give you the idea of how you can use it in an insurance perspective. So, obviously with customer experience, you have product experience, you have employee experience, and all these other things. This is for Allstate. If you're not familiar, Allstate is 16 million customers in the US. They provide insurance. They have an app called Drivewise that if you keep it while you're driving, it will adjust your policy in real time. So the better you drive, the cheaper the policy becomes, which is great for the customer, right? So they were analyzing the customer feedback in real time and able to see that actually customers reporting missing trips. So basically the app was not picking up certain trips. And you can imagine as a policyholder, that was driving anger by 55% because your policies were going up. And we predicted if they fixed certain issues in the app, that would drive their CSAT by 17%. They went ahead and did that. As a result of that, they increased trust in the application by 9%. They reduced the issues reported on the app, and they were able to increase the CSAT by 16.6%, nearly 17% in terms of predicting. So that's just to give you an idea of how you can do that. And just finally, the second point is where you keep the metric but change the question. So this is for employee experience for frontline workers. So Allstate use a technique called memory writing, where you get your customers or employees to write in the third person. That will generate more verbatims. They analyzed the first 90 days experience of new employees. They found that the onboarding experience was driving less trust because they're giving all the value in the last 10 days. They flipped that around, give that value in the first 10 days, and they reduced the onboarding time by 20%. So this technique of memory writing, where you're framing the question in a different way to get more verbatim, is a really powerful way to do that. This is where I think it's really powerful, and where I'll end the presentation, where you can get rid of the metric and get rid of the question and focus on the business outcome. So this example is for Microsoft. Microsoft were during the pandemic delivering customer support globally. Everyone doing that remote, people doing it in Nigeria and all over the world, right? they framed the question, how confident are you to maintain customer service during COVID? So they were asking their employees, of the customer service employees, how confident they were in a rating of 0 to 10. So they used that then to frame a question to say, what are the barriers at work and at home? So they were able to say, okay, if we remove these barriers, we will then predict an increase in the confidence of our the people delivering the customer service. So we were able to identify what those issues were. It was all around mental health and office setup. They were able to fix that, increase their confidence of their customer service by 13%. So maybe just pause there. And this is where I promised I would give a present. So everyone who's attended today, we're going to offer 3 decision-ready insights on their brand. So if you reply in the chat, if you would want either to give us our NPS data, or we will use online reviews. If you just message in the chat 3 insights, David and our hosts will ensure that you get those 3 insights. So that's a complimentary offer, no strings attached. Well, you get a scorecard that I've just illustrated, and hopefully that provides a good conclusion to today's discussion. I know there's a couple of questions there, but I'll maybe pause for David and our colleagues to kind of round off the session.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate it. So big round of applause. And thanks for the gift. Indeed, please don't hesitate to reach out to team@madeforcx.com to claim the gift. We'll make sure it happens. We will also share the recording after the session so you can share it further. Chris, really, really appreciate you sharing the insights and ins and outs about your amazing work you're doing. And don't hesitate to also check out any other content that we have on Emotion AI this month, published on MadeForCX.com. Thank you again, and hope to see you in our next session, and have a lovely afternoon for the rest.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.